All right. I'm going to talk briefly in this section. I'm going to kind of cut this down a little bit, but I'm going to talk briefly about trade. Okay. So I'm going to talk briefly about international trade and tariffs. Tariffs and taxes are a little different, but I think it's still kind of appropriate to just include that idea here. Okay. So remember, this is an economy. This is some market if we have no trade. Okay. So if we have no trade, our consumer surplus would be here, and our producer surplus would be here. Now, if we add trade, okay, so if we allow trade, free trade, then something changes a little bit. Okay, so, and we're going to assume that this thing is relatively cheap in other countries compared to yours. Okay, so we're assuming it's cheaper in other countries than it is in your country. So this is the world price. Okay, let's suppose we can buy it from other countries on the international market at that price. Now, what happens? Okay, so we're going to see some changes, and we're going to see one change is, well, at that price. And so you're not going to say, well, I'll buy from my local company for 20 bucks, or I can buy this imported one, which I might not even be aware it's imported if it's selling in a local store, for $10. No, people generally, they're just going to buy whatever one is cheaper. So now their quantity demand is going to go way up to here, right? Before, remember, they were here, Q star, and they were paying P star. Okay, and for the companies, only some really efficient companies will be able to hang in there, and the rest of them are probably going to have to shut down this good. So this is a good where the situation was the world price is less than your local price, right? The world price is less than your local price without any trade. And so this part right here is our imports. Okay, so we're going to be importing that much. So the question we can ask ourselves is, well, what happens to our surplus? Well, the first one is pretty easy. Our producer surplus goes way down. It's just this little tiny triangle. Okay, and what happened to the rest of this producer surplus now goes to the customer. Okay, so this part used to go, there used to be part of that was going to the producer, if you look on the left, and now it goes to the customer. The interesting though is now this trade allows us to escape our original economic surplus. So actually, this whole thing is our consumer surplus. Okay, so with trade, when we have trade of imports, right, in the case where the world price is lower than our price, then we get an increase in consumer surplus, and we get a decrease in producer surplus in this particular market. This is not in the whole economy, just in this particular market. But the net effect is we get an increase in economic surplus. And how do we see this increase? Well, this increase is this part. This increase is this part. Okay. This is an increase in in total economic surplus, because before no one could get that. In fact, it was even impossible to produce that. And now we're getting that. And the reason we're getting that is because the people in the rest of the world are producing this good and selling it to us at a price which is below our marginal benefit. So our consumers are benefiting from consuming this part. Okay, so this triangle is known as the gains to trade. Something that's not shown in this graph, but really important to keep in mind, is that right now it looks like some people might say, oh man, imports are really bad for our companies. Because yes, our consumers benefit a lot, but who's going to have jobs if we do this? Well, actually, lots of times the customer buying the product is actually another company. Okay, so in that case, it could be they're using it as an input. Right? So for example, they might be buying some kind of auto part or computer component or something like that, and they're getting it much cheaper, and then they're able to put it together with the other things they have, some of which are made here and assembled here, and in the end, the sale is occurring here. or it might even be a U.S. company that's sourcing their parts, some parts from abroad. And yes, it will cost some jobs in one sector, but it's very likely creating jobs in another sector. Okay, so it's costing jobs on one side, but this cheap price can also lower their cost and increase their sales of that final good that they're selling. But of course, we can't see that in this side. Okay, so this is what this looks like. And so let's suppose the producers are not happy with this situation, and they want to fight back. Okay, so what can they do? So now one thing they can do, oops, I think I could switch out of rainbow, is they could lobby the government and they can get a tariff. So this is a tax on imports. Okay, so I'm going to just draw the same graphs again, roughly, but I'm going to just change something. Okay, so here's our world price, and here is our coin demand and our coin supply, and remember the difference between them is the imports. So they say, well, we need protection because we can't compete with these cheap imports. Okay, and this is a common argument. In some countries there's a lot of tariffs, in other countries there's less. Usually there's at least one or two, some industries that are politically powerful, and they find a way to get protection. Okay, so what happens is it's not going to look like the other tax because it doesn't affect the domestic producers. It only affects the import, so it's really just going to affect this world price. So what they say is, well, okay, we'll put a tariff on there for you. So now when you buy it, you pay the world price plus a tariff. Okay, and so this just effectively for your domestic buyers, it raises the price they're going to pay. Okay, so actually, who pays tariffs? The domestic buyers pay the tariffs. If those domestic buyers, I'll put it with a T. If those domestic buyers are customers in a store, they're paying for the tariff, or if they're companies buying intermediate goods that they're going to turn into their final product, then they pay for the tariff. Okay, but that's who pays for the tariffs. So we get a benefit here. So our quantity supply goes up, and our quantity demand goes down, and our imports will reduce. Okay, so one way to reduce the imports is to put tariffs on them. But of course, this is going to come at a cost, and that cost is going to be a loss of surplus. So let's divide up the areas. Okay, so first of all, our consumer surplus got smaller. Okay, so this is the effects of a tariff. It's going to lower the consumer surplus. And again, it's not shown in this graph, but if this good is some kind of input that's used in production of other things, it's going to increase costs in those industries, and it's going to reduce sales in those industries. So it's some of this might not be actually directly going to the consumer. Some of this might be hurting companies who are producing other goods, right? Like raising the cost of electronics that they're producing, or electronics they're using in the production of something else, for example. And then our producer surplus is going to go up. This is now our producer surplus. So this little part that I shaded, the extra part, they captured that part by this tariff, right? They get that little extra part that was going to the consumer before. Now they were able to capture it by getting this tariff. So the producer surplus goes up. We also have some revenue. Right, so this is the tariff revenue. It's the quantity of imports. So that's that times the height of the tariff, which is here. That's the tariff. So this is our tariff, right? And so they get tariff revenue. And then some of you are saying, well, what about these last two triangles? There's these two triangles that no one gets. And yes, that's true. No one gets them. So there's this triangle and there's this triangle. And these are, you guessed it, deadweight loss. Okay, and the reason they're deadweight loss is because before they were economic surplus, and now no one gets them. Okay, and so why? Before they were both part of the consumer surplus, and now they are no one can get them. So the one is cause. So this one, let me call this one maybe A and B. Okay, so A, the one on the right, is caused from consumers buying less. Okay, because the price is now higher, they buy less, and so they don't get to enjoy the stuff as much, right? So they would have bought more, or they would have bought more, or the company would have, you know, sold more of the product they put this in, and now they buy less, and so there's less surplus to go from. B is from the inefficient local production. That one's a little harder to understand, but B comes from that your domestic companies are not as efficient as the foreign companies, and so these ones, the ones from here to here, these ones in here, they're not as efficient as the foreign companies. They have higher costs than these foreign companies, and you're forcing your consumer to, instead of buying from one of the efficient foreign companies, to buy from your inefficient local company. And because it's raised costs and the costs are not surplus for anybody, then this is just destroying surplus. Okay, so this is our result of our tariffs, right? And this is kind of a classic result of tariffs. So yes, tariffs can sometimes increase jobs in specific local industries, but the overall cost of the economy is quite a bit more. And one of the things, again, that is hidden from this is that often they might benefit one specific industry, but they might be hurting other industries at the same time, because those other industries will depend on these imported inputs as part of their production process. Okay, we're going to come back and look at two other things on this.